I'm going to talk to you today about the other tool that Marcella teased, which is the fishbone analysis. So fishbone analysis is another example of a root cause analysis tool. And whereas 5 whys is linear, you ask a why question, you get an answer, you ask a why question, you get another answer. Fishbone analysis is about breaking things down into their core components and figuring out all of the things that factor in to the problem that you're diagnosing. So what is it? It's a deep dive root cause analysis tool. If you've never heard of a fishbone before, you might have heard it referred to as a cause and effect diagram or an Ishikawa diagram. They're all referring to the same concept, and that's that you have an effect, a problem that you're trying to work on, and you're trying to get at the causes of that effect. And although we're going to talk about many different ways that you can utilize a fishbone diagram, it breaks down into these core elements. So you have these arrows that connect to the main problem and they set up categories. So you could have, this is an example of materials, methods, manpower, machines, Mother Nature, measurements, or the 6Ms that we're going to talk about. But along each one of these avenues, you have a primary cause that factors into them. And those primary causes might have causes themselves. So you can get into secondary causes, third degree causes, theoretically infinitely deep in 6 different categories. You can see how this thing can dramatically increase in complexity as you move forward, but it really helps you explore the entire universe of contributing factors to a problem, and that's where the power of the fishbone diagram lies. So why would you do a fishbone diagram? Well, you'd want to use it whenever you want to use any root cause, when you want to dig deeper, when you want to make sure you're dealing with the right problem, but when you acknowledge the fact that your problem is complex and that it might not have a simple this thing causes this came nature to it, when there might be environmental causes, where there might be material causes, where people play a role, when you understand that there are multiple aspects to it. Because we recognize that problems can be complex. It's not unusual for problems to have multiple causes, and that those causes are themselves caused by something else. So it acknowledges kind of a real world complexity, and that's what's really great about the tool. The more you understand the causes of the problems you're dealing with, the more effective your countermeasures are going to be, because you can directly get at the root of those problems. That's why it's called a root cause analysis. You can pull up a root, but if you can pull up a weed, but if you don't get the root, it's just going to grow back. And you can use this tool to interrogate any problem. And the higher the stakes of the problem you're trying to solve, the more time it's worth spending understanding the contributing factors to that problem. And as for the fishbone diagram itself, every time I've run a fishbone exercise, people come away shocked with how much better they understand the problem and how good they feel about tackling solutions. So how do you actually utilize it? There are a couple ways that you can use the tool. Again, it's still oriented around these branches. It's just how you decide to utilize those branches. So you can go with a default like the 6Ms that we saw in our demo: materials, methods, manpower, machines, Mother Nature, measurements. Oftentimes our problems fall into these categories, right? So there's problems with the materials, there's a problem with the process, so then we're talking methods. There's a human element to the problem, that's manpower. It's a technology hurdle, there are machines involved. If there's Mother Nature, there's a natural cause to that. Or measurements, where we're not even getting an accurate reflection of what the problem is because we can't get good data on it. These are all things that can be true at once about a problem. But you don't have to stick to those 6. You could just choose 4 of them if you think that Mother Nature or measurements don't really play a role, or it's entirely a technological problem and manpower doesn't get involved. You don't have to use all 6Ms, but also you don't have to use any of the 6Ms. You can just sort of dynamically create the branches as they occur. You can start with a problem and say, okay, well, there's a problem with the managers, and managers becomes a branch, and you talk about all the causes that have managers as an orientation. And then, well, there's a problem with the technology. It's not helping us. So now there's a technology and a manager branch. And you just use the number of branches in the number of areas that come up. As far as layers of cause, you want to try and stick to 3 layers of cause. Anything beyond that can get really complicated really fast, and it's hard to visualize. That doesn't mean you can't do it, but you might want to take it to a separate tool like a 5 whys to really interrogate a specific branch of the thing. If you suddenly find yourself opening a can of worms, and you don't want to abandon that branch because you feel like there's a lot of good information there, dig in with the 5 whys, but with the Fishbone, you want to see how all of it factors together. So I'm going to go ahead and show you an example of a Fishbone diagram that we ran as part of assessing staff are not satisfied with decision-making communication at DEC. So leadership asked the Pulse team to look into, Pulse team is a team within DEC that's tasked with sort of representing staff within the organization. Basically, they want a staff eye view of what's causing communication hurdles within the organization. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of potential causes for breakdowns in communication. And so we did one of those dynamic Fishbone diagram breakdowns. So we just sort of started tracking ideas using, we ended up with the following branches. So people, content, process, and technology. Now, a lot of these will end up looking like some of the 6Ms, just under different wording. If the 6Ms don't appeal to you, that's fine too. And we use nomenclature-wise, because this is in Microsoft OneNote, the top item is sort of the first cause, and any bullet points are secondary causes. You can also run a Fishbone diagram on a variety of tools, but I haven't really found that a lot of diagramming tools make good use of the Fishbone process. Justin, Kenny, and I have gone back and forth over the right way to do that, and I still haven't settled on something that I'm happy with. But so you can sort of see how these things work in practice. So we can take a look at people. So what's going on with people to explain the problem of staff are not satisfied with decision making? Well, staff don't feel heard. If staff don't feel heard, they are probably not satisfied with the communication. Well, okay, but why don't they feel heard? Well, they don't feel heard because they're not being asked what they think. Their input's not being utilized. Issues are not being addressed when raised. And issues are not being addressed when raised, we can break into further causes. So they're not told when there's an issue. They're dismissing expertise. These are all causes, and you can sort of interrogate the logic of it by saying, when expertise is dismissed, issues are not being addressed when they're raised. And staff do not feel heard when issues are not being addressed. Staff are not satisfied with decision-making communication when staff do not feel heard. You can see the logic in it as you explain it, and you could do that for any of these. So if we go to technology, remember, we're talking about the problem staff are not satisfied with decision-making. Communication differs across platforms. So we have a lot of platforms, and no one knows where and how they should be communicating across them. And we're not tailoring the communication to the platforms themselves. So the fact that there are communications going all over the place are all contributing to the problem Whereas 5 whys, we might end up with just one of these. We might end up with staff are not satisfied. Well, they lack context. Okay, well, why do they lack context? There are so many reorgs that nobody can keep track of anything. Okay, so people are confused. Let's send out revised org charts. The end. But we acknowledge the fact that there's a complication there, that things are more complex than one simple solution can recommend, and that's where a tool like this really comes in handy. So that's the fishbone diagram, and I would like to open up the field to any questions about the fishbone diagram. I'll leave this up for people to sort of ponder too. John Sikowski, go for it.
Comment and question. The comment is, Marcel and I did one of these a couple of years ago, and it was a very valuable tool in one of her internal processes. I think my recollection is I came away with a kind of a wow, that was really helpful. It took more time than we thought. I'm curious if you have a recommendation on how much time a group would want to budget on this exercise. I mean, recognizing that, the complexity of the question and the number of people in the room, but do you have a general sense for, how much time, maybe using this one as an example, how much time did it take and how much time would you recommend people budget for working through one of these?
This one took about an hour and a half to work through, and that was with 6 staff, and it was facilitated online. The conversation's a lot better if you can do them in person, although it's been a long time since I've done an in-person fishbone. And so you have to allocate a little bit of extra time for those conversations. I think what's amazing about the root cause analysis is, despite a hesitancy to do root cause analysis, I've never come out of a fishbone diagram and have people go, well, that was a waste of time. They always come away with a profound sense of understanding that has eluded them up to now. It gives people a really great feeling of, okay, I know what's going into a problem. And what's really cool about it too is it sort of generates a checklist of things you want to tackle. It lends itself very naturally to problem solving, right? So if we're dedicated to overcoming this problem, we can say, okay, let's take each one of these root causes, make it a checklist, and tackle each one. I've done that with some of the projects that I've worked on in the past, and it created some of the biggest transformations that I've seen, because it deals with so many different elements that all contribute to the cause. And when you talk about turning the curve or implementing change management, it really helps you make sure you've got all your bases covered. You're not leaving a big open-ended question that's going to hit you when you least expect it. So I'm okay with investing the amount of time it takes to do a good root cause analysis. And sometimes for a big complex problem, it might take you 2 or even 2.5 hours, which is the most that I would want to spend, I think, especially if it's online. But if you can do it offline and do it with people in a room safely at some point in the future, I think it's worth your time to do it, because root cause analysis is very beneficial. It's a great question.
You could probably break it up too, which we may have done. You do like one bone over, in a session, and then another bone in a session.
Yeah. Yep. If you know what categories you want to work into, you could tackle 2 here for an hour, 2 there for another hour. Ned.
So, John, it looks like there was I see the red and the blue coloring in the text, and so it looks like there was kind of a higher order review of which ones were thought to be of more interest to perhaps the participants. And I'm also wondering if this was done in this format with sticky notes, digitally, or in reality, whether you might go from this diagram to basically a cluster analysis and looking at cause and effect relationships that are crossing among these different branches.
Yeah, and you can see how elements within this are connected. So you could do you could address them by theme. Like they're loosely based on a theme already, but there is a crosswalk here. Like managers touch a lot of the aspects here. Staff sentiment touches a bunch of stuff here, and you could tie it in a lot of ways. You could go through some sort of multi-voting process. So you imagine a close-knit team works out the root cause analysis, comes up with a bunch of potential factors, but then you open it up to a larger community and allow them to vote, or using multi-voting or some sort of process to say, like, I agree, I think this is a really significant problem, and that would really help you pinpoint the areas where people think the most change is needed the soonest. It's a really great foundational tool for problem solving. It leads into so many things that we talk about in lean and continuous improvement that you really can't go wrong with doing a root cause analysis of some kind, 5 whys if you don't have a lot of time, or fishbone diagram if you can afford the time to really dig in. Justin.
Yeah, I would just add to Ned's question. It is typical that you will see one cause show up in a number of bones that is contributing to many different issues that you're seeing on the surface. Like you will often see that. It's not like one thing causes one thing causes one thing. It's usually one thing causes 5 things that you're experiencing. That's the thing that you want to net, is that one thing that's having a really large impact.
And that touches on the idea of nested fishbone diagrams, because you might start a fishbone diagram with a problem, stumble on one thing and be like, oh my God, this one thing is like a million things. And then you're like, okay, we're doing a fishbone on the wrong thing. We need to be interrogating this thing. And so then you can dig deeper on that. And it's really a tool that helps you investigate, find those, and make sure stuff doesn't slip through the cracks, because that's how you see change. That's how you see improvement. All right, we're at time. I want to thank everyone so much. This has been great. I love talking about root cause. Marcella, thank you. That was an absolutely phenomenal job. And thank you everyone for your great questions and your participation today. We've got our 5th and final one of these tomorrow. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you then. Have a great day.